This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Just when you thought we were going to get a little R&R from deading people off, we got to put two more on the slab, man. But as always, man, it's always exciting when it's NBA basketball talk, NBA playoff times, because when the bodies start falling, that means it's getting closer. You know what I'm saying? Last team standing, so to speak. So, as always, let me go and roll out the red carpet to the right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw? We're finally good now. We're finally over round one of the playoffs.
Round one is complete. Thank you to the Cleveland Cavaliers and Orlando Magic, having us doing a little overtime here as they extend their series to 7 games. But exciting basketball, especially for a young team like Orlando. Their first taste of playoff basketball. They acquitted themselves pretty well, but here they are. They find us here now in their autopsy report, their first playoff edition autopsy report, and another team that we'll get to as well, too, that had some larger aspirations that expected to definitely be going on to at least the second round, but wasn't meant to be for them.
Wasn't meant to be. But in all fairness, though, because it's their first time, we will discuss them last.
There we go. Let's take it easy on them because
we're not gonna rush them into the. You know what I'm saying? We're not gonna cremate them so quickly. We'll just
all right.
You know what I'm saying? We'll push them to the back end. Let them take in the ambiance of what it's like to be a part of the playoff edition of the Autopsy Report. Listen, better this conversation now than being among the first ones. Since how long have we been doing this Autopsy Report now? Almost 2 months now? Yeah. So I would think you prefer us talking about you on the back end of the 2-month discussion than the front.
Very true.
Yeah. Anyway, as always, and my man Shaw alluded to, man, we'll be discussing the Clippers and the Magic coveted Autopsy Report, putting them on the slab. As always, be sure to get on my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Leader Show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Always go to www.thebaselinenba.com to check out not just this episode, but all of our great episodes that we've got laid out for your listening pleasure. If you're catching us on YouTube and you see the blue and white logo, that's us, and that is the 19 Media Group family. And as always, 19 Media Group, we running these content streets. So be sure to go to www.the19mediagroup.com to not only check out our show, but also check out the family of great content creators that we have a part of the 19 Media family, whether it's sports, entertainment, music, culture, you name it, we've got it. So be sure to get us to lock us in at www.19mediagroup.com. So, Shaw, let's get right into it. Let's not waste, any time discussing the Los Angeles Clippers. First round exit, to the Dallas Mavericks. One of the things I was thinking about, as far as how we should approach evaluating the Los Angeles Clippers, because I feel like at times I tend to conflate my emotional aspect of things with what, is just practical thinking here, right? Mm-hmm. And by all accounts, you can make the argument that the Los Angeles Clippers, given the tumultuous tenure that is a reflection of Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and whoever they keep throwing on into the roster to pair up with these guys, this probably has been the most quiet version of the Clippers. And yet what's going to resonate the most about what's taking place is how they're being exited out, right? Like, now the big questions will finally arise about what the circumstances of this roster will look like come off-season time, free agency rolls around. And I guess, to me, Shaw, I feel bad because I don't want an iteration of no matter what you do, you can't keep the big two, right? There really hasn't been a big three. There's really just been a big two and complementary parts. When you throw in Harden, you throw in Westbrook, they never found a way to make it work. I don't know how you can say, all right, let's try to run it back again, because you can't really use this season as quote unquote the litmus test to determine, whether or not they're going to be as competitive as we had given credence to when Kawhi and Paul George first came onto the scene, 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago.
Well, there was a lot to be said, I think, about that 25-6 stretch that they had. I think, right after the original rough patch of the Harden trade. And I think this blends into perfectly going into a clip from Paul George, who talks about their season. They were mostly healthy. The reporter asked them, like, hey, like, what else can y'all do? You try to be here. You both played 70-plus games, but then got hurt at the wrong time. Listen to PG here. He's a little despondent, to say the least, but we'll come back here after this PG clip.
Yeah. But I mean, that's this is a brutal sport we play. It's what we sign up for. You put your body on the line on a nightly basis. I think that's what people don't quite understand. It takes a lot to go through a whole season and go through a whole season healthy, and then play the toughest part of the season at the end of all of that. It's not easy, and so it's taxing. It's taxing mentally. It's taxing physically. And the result of that sometimes, it's a lot of stress on the body.
Listen, why are you laughing?
Hold up a second. Hold up. First of all, he said, yeah, this is a brutal sport. Almost making it sound like this is like UFC, MMA.
Well, I mean, the travel, 80-plus games. Come on, Kyle. Like, don't be that guy. And they're campaigning to try to play more like 72 games a year because it's so much harder than it is now. I mean, than it was back in the day, et cetera, et cetera. All right, yeah, I see you're not buying it, but but from the Paul George side, listen. They did get hurt at the worst time, similar to teams we just autopsied in the last show in Milwaukee. Giannis gets hurt literally right before the playoffs. And I think it's hard for the Clippers. Like, you feel like you've tried everything. And we've had this conversation on our previous shows too. Sometimes the mix just isn't there. Like this juju, for whatever reason, just doesn't work. And that's where I think the Clippers are at. PG, for some reason, does not have the contract situated. He goes on to answer that question later on in the interview. It's like, hey, well, that's what's in the cards. Happy to be here. But he's not hitching his wagon to this Clippers franchise, although the Clippers have hitched their wagon to Kawhi, a little bit earlier on here, to the tune over $100 million over the next, couple of years. Really interesting situations happening in LA, but this is a talented roster that yet again underachieved. Although I do want to give the Mavericks a lot of credit here as well too.
Yeah, I want to give the Mavericks more credit than possible, because I think going into this, we really like the Mavericks in this series because, to your point, Shaw, while we gave kudos for the LA Clippers somewhat looking like among one of the better teams in the Western Conference, it still became a question of, is it going to be there when it matters the most?
Right.
And I feel like if there was ever a time that Paul George could answer that question that was asked of him, rather than saying it's a brutal sport, he could have just simply said, hey man, this is how cruel the sport can be. And I know firsthand of what that's like. To put your body on the line for over 82 games, and then your body, doesn't respond or fails you at the highest point of your career or your life. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing you can do, but this is the risk that we take. I to your point, Shaw, I feel like when I hear these type of responses from Paul George, and we spoke about this, okay, this to me is exactly the reason why it's hard to say you want Paul George as your 1A guy, as the guy. I think he's a guy that can help you. He's probably a 1B type player. You know what I'm saying? But this is going all the way back to Indiana. This is not a knock on him. But this is like when I hear Anthony Edwards talk, and the kid's but 22 years old, nothing comes out of his mouth sounds like, gray area type stuff, right? Like, where are you coming from with this? He's either going to say, I'm there or I'm not there, right? It's an either or thing. He's either say I brought my A game or I didn't bring my A game. He's like I struggled or I didn't struggle. He's either like I don't want to be called playoff P until you see me, you know what I'm saying, show you that I'm playoff P. You get what I'm saying? Like that is the mentality that I think has been lacking with the LA Clippers. It's not a question of the fact that when you put these guys together that they're not talented enough. It's that who is heading that ship? Who is leading that charge? Who is bringing them out of their own mental funk? Because listen, all of them have demons, Shaw. Let's not. It's amazing to me in the 4 years that we've been talking about the composition of this basketball team that we just suddenly, overlook the fact that Kawhi Leonard has a checkered past, right? Paul George has a checkered past. James Harden has a checkered past. Russell Westbrook has You don't think that in a game of chess that you're putting these guys with checkered past, that they're going to be playing a completely different game than what's on the board for them? You see what I'm saying? And look at Tyron Lue. Even Tyron Lue has a checkered past. I am not saying it to say they all suck. I'm not saying it to say, they're not good enough. But what I'm saying is that if you're all not in tune, if you're not on the same page with what the ultimate goal is, and your boss, the guy who's cutting your checks, Steve Ballmer, he is so passionate about winning. Listen, there are few guys who I would love to root for to actually see win a championship. But it's hard pressed to tell me if we rewound this whole thing back again and we said, Steve Ballmer, are you going to put together these same, cut the checks for all of what you've been seeing for the last 4 or 5 years? I guarantee you he'd be kind of like, maybe some, but definitely not for all of it. Because I just don't think they've all been on the same page about what the goal should have been. And I think, again, it rears its ugly head at the most ugliest times. And then the people who you need to speak to it are the last people that you want talking about it.
That's tough. I love what you did there with the checkered and chess there. I mean, see what you're doing. I mean, that using that hip hop lyricism, in a great time for hip hop, mind you, as well, too.
I mean, while it's still in my head, man, I'm getting old. So, I don't know how much longer it's going to be resting in the medulla.
Well, the cerebellum. What's interesting, I think, for me, for the Clippers, is not only the PG contract aspect, but it's also the James Harden contract aspect. PJ Tucker, they broke glass emergency here, put him in Game 6 after not really utilizing him for much of the playoffs. He has an $11 million option, but he wanted to get out of there. He's 39, is it? Something like that. He's an older guy, and does he take that 11 million and stay with this roster? Or does he say, you know what, it's time for me to get up out of here, but knowing that he's not going to get $11 million anywhere else? And again, I don't want to spend too much time about PJ Tucker, but I think just trying to figure out the sum of all the parts here for the Clippers, Harden, PG's contract, they decided to hitch their wagon to Kawhi. What's the makeup here? Tyron Lue being bantered about as a potential Clippers coach. The potential Lakers coach. There's a lot of misconception and misdirection going on there. They're trying to open up a new arena next year. A lot of things happening in Clipperland that is a little bit confusing for me.
It is. And until something is a little bit more like firm, like shored up, I think this is the level of uncertainty that you're going to have to contend with and deal with. And I think that brings up an even more interesting point. We often talk about how head coaches usually become the fall guy for circumstances that they really don't have control over, even though, you want to look at it from an X's and O's standpoint. He didn't get them, up to play. Listen, I'm not saying that Tyron Lue is not deserving of being considered one of the top head coaches in basketball. He very much is. Okay. But you do also recognize as well, too, that Tyron Lue, outside of winning that championship in the land, right, you do see that there are shortcomings to his style of coaching. You do see that there can be a limit, a breaking point. Now, fortunately, he hasn't been put in a position where if he's being dismissed, it's being dismissed because he doesn't have the ear of the guys in the locker room, or, his exits in playoff basketball are so egregious that it's like, we got to find somebody better. You'd be hard pressed to really find anyone better. But if you're Tyron Lue, Shaw, do you really want to come back to this situation? Because unless there's something that's going to, and maybe I'm putting this more so on Lawrence Frank, but unless there's something that's going to rein in the circus that I think is going to follow the Los Angeles Clippers until over the next year or so, maybe until this arena is completely finished, or until we get through one of these contracts between PG or Kawhi Leonard or whatever. Do you really want to be coming back to this? Do you really want to, like, I don't think Tyron Lue fully has control of a situation, even if it was set up for him to be the guy, so to speak, because I often feel as well too that Tyron Lue's heart really was that he wanted to coach the Los Angeles Lakers, but he obviously took the next best thing and probably thought that Frank and Ballmer were looking out for his best interests in how they were helping to construct this roster. But you look at the way that this roster operates and what he has to do to make it work. I just don't know if you continue to stay in this long enough until now you become collateral damage for what may not become of the Los Angeles Clippers.
I don't know that the Lakers would give him a better opportunity or chance. I mean, obviously Friendly has a relationship with LeBron, but part of his frustration with the Clippers is that the load management aspect of things and the consistent injuries. Well, across the hallway, and now will be, I guess, across, somewhere across the city when the Clippers, go into their new building. But the Lakers have similar issues, in terms of injuries. And while they don't load manage LeBron and AD per se, they have had some injuries that have prevented them to be successful this year aside. So I don't know that either situation is better. There's the allure of what Lakers land is in terms of just the mantra of all their championships, but I don't know that it's a better situation for him one way or the other.
No, I completely am on board with you about that. And if he chooses to do that, that's just foolish on him. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the first iteration in which he should have been hired as the Lakers head coach, and the Lakers wound up going with Frank Vogel because they couldn't snatch up Tyron Lue. And what I'm saying is that, at that time, Tyron Lue's power, right? Like, I'm not saying it's carrying over and he's like hanging on bad vibes with them. What I'm saying is the ability to have control of your circumstance to give you the best chances possible to maximize the greatness of your coaching. And I feel like if he stays with the Clippers too long, all of that is going to be a mark against his legacy, even though it's really not on him. It's I'm not saying it's, he's not part of it, but I'm saying it is definitely, like, if we put this at 100%, I'd say Tyron Lue's culpability in this, maybe 20, maybe. You get what I'm saying? But if he hangs around long enough and they're putting these guys out there that we say are great guys, but they don't vibe with Tyron Lue. Now Tyron Lue is hanging around in a situation where he can't coach these guys up, and he'll become marginal in the grander scheme of things, where then he gets ousted out. And then again, his legacy as being a great coach takes a hit.
Well, I think it's who do they decide to ultimately keep? Lue aside. So you bring him back. Is Harden coming back? At what number? Is PG coming back? Again, at what number? Is Russ gonna stay there? He signed for another year. But Plumlee and a couple of other auxiliary parts on this team, that how do you build it in a short term in a free agent class that's dire? Draft capital is not maybe as poor as some others, but to get PJ cost you a lot. So the Clippers are in a rough situation there, and we know Ballmer's willing to spend, but what assets do they have to acquire that they don't already have that can get them to the next step? In addition to knowing that they have guys that continually break down, unfortunately, I think that's truly at the center of Lue's frustration with this team, this roster, this organization. I think he likes the guys themselves, but the mix is just not what anybody would have wanted it to, including the players themselves.
And I think reliability also speaks to it as well. Now, one other thing I think is really indicative of this team, in look, to your point, what you said earlier, they played 70 plus games. But can we honestly say that this was probably the best offensive iteration, that the Clippers have? It makes me wonder who really needs to be the scorer on that team, right? Do you really want it to be Paul George? If that's the case, then it's on playoff P that, he didn't show up in this series against the Dallas Mavericks. And it's not that the Dallas Mavericks haven't improved defensively. They have. But clearly, his inability to be consistent with scoring the basketball, and then James Harden, who shows up, doesn't show up, partly because it's this thing with people's infatuation about James Harden being more of a point guard than being a scorer. I think at the end of the day, you have to be settled on the fact that if you want Paul George to be a scorer, then you can't ask for James Harden to be a scorer as well too, because they don't pair up well, in my opinion. I think your focus, if you're James Harden, facilitate and get these guys looks, get them their shots, and be confident that you will eventually have to get yours when you need to. But if your focus is that you want James Harden to score the basketball, then that means Paul George, Kawhi Leonard all have to accept the idea that they're not going to get that many touches. They're going to have to accept the idea that the ball is going to stick in James Harden's hands a lot. And that to me is, I think, the conundrum, because the rest of the ancillary parts clearly do not know how to score without a facilitator on the floor. So the dynamic of those three, you knew coming in, was going to be dangerous. And I think this is exactly the manifestation of, if you're Tyron Lue, how do you, you know what I'm saying, split it the middle so you can make everybody happy in that sense?
I mean, I don't know if I agree there. I think Harden has understood, even within himself, that, hey, I don't want to be, Houston Harden. Like, those days are gone, and he's more of a facilitator now. They brought Harden in to be exactly that, to take the pressure, because Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were having to do too much playmaking on their own. Lue goes on to say in that press conference as well, too, like, hey, James takes a lot of pressure off of those guys. Harden only shot 12 shots a game this year. So it's not like he's out there campaigning. Now, again, because Kawhi was out, he had to step up his production in the playoffs. And that's where you point the finger at Paul George. And then we said this even going into, the playoff disappointments. Without Kawhi, everybody becomes miscast. So Harden is not ready to be Harden from Houston again. And if Paul George is, stinking it up, shooting 41% and averaging under 20 a game in the playoffs, well, Harden is like, well, what else am I going to do? Who else is here? And so, again, that miscasting is just an unfortunate aspect of the injuries that the Clippers continue to face. But I don't think Harden is, I don't think he's trying to do more than he's asked to do in whatever is required of that specific game and that time. And I don't think Lue or Kawhi or PJ, there's everybody understands their role here, but those roles shift as people get injured.
I understand. Listen, without belaboring the point, I think what I'm merely saying is that if you continue to have James Harden on this court, I feel like I would rely more on James Harden's ability to score the basketball more than I do Paul George's. And I think,
yikes.
This sound, Shaw, I get it. This sounds crazy, but here's my thing. You are asking Paul George to shoot the basketball. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have a good shot. What I'm saying is that the shot's not consistent. And I'd rather have someone that has the capability of not only being able to shoot, but getting down in that basket, getting down and getting free throws, getting and ones. That stops when James Harden has to worry more about facilitating and just camping out. You get what I'm saying? If the idea is that can only happen until Kawhi Leonard is back out on the floor, it still doesn't change the fact that between those two players, between Kawhi and Paul George, there is a lack of willingness to get down and dirty in the paint anymore. It's perimeter J, expand out behind the three-point line. Okay, but if you're not making the shots, if you're not hitting it at a high clip, if the situation is too tense that you just are not making it, then what are we doing with James Harden? You know what I'm saying? What are you doing with Zubac? What are you doing with these other guys? To your point, they all become misplaced. And I just think I've watched enough of it to see that you're only going to get so much offensive prowess from Paul George at this juncture, whether it's because of injury or just the way that he plays the game. But you cannot function like this if you're the Clippers and be offensively effective and efficient when these guys are not going to be aggressive with the basketball when it's given to them.
All right, man. I think we would that'll be a clippable moment here for us on the baseline, because I don't think there's many people who would agree with Harden taking more of an offensive, in terms of shooting.
Keeping him on this roster, I'm just saying you're going to probably have to ask for Houston Harden again because he's the only person who is willing to go down there and do, because he's the only one savvy enough to push it so that he can get at least to the free throw line. Like, to me, I just don't see that from the Clippers. I think they get perimeter happy in places where they haven't exhibited the consistency to rely on it as much as they think they do.
I get you. I mean, Harden he still led the league or led the team in free throw attempts. So he is, drawing more fouls, but that's a combination. He flails out there. He's doing his little ball fakes. And so he gets fouled out on his jumpers too, but he is more willing to go to the rack than I think the other two. At the same time, those guys did shoot over 40% from three this year. So it's kind of hard to knock what they did offensively. But again, I think in the hardest and the biggest moments, Kawhi just wasn't available, and PG shrinked against the Dallas defense and did not have a good series at all, especially when he has a contract that he's trying to get an extension for. That's going to be fresh, I think, in Lawrence Frank's mind, as they try to figure out what they're going to do with his team moving forward.
And the bag might be a little bit light this offseason.
A little bit. A little light in the ass.
Yeah, a little light. Might be cryptoed. Anyway, you're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, talk about this young Orlando Magic team. While they unfortunately saw their first round exit hit them hard in a great Game 7 against the Cleveland Cavaliers, you have to be feeling good if you are an Orlando Magic fan of the prospects of success over the next few years with the way that this team is constructed and the job that Jamal Mosley did. But we'll dig into that. But first, are you ready to elevate your fantasy sports experience? With Prize Picks, you can win up to 100 times your money during the most thrilling time of the basketball season. Imagine turning a $10 entry into a whopping $1,000. And with the playoffs in full swing, there's no better time to get in on the action. But that's not all. Prize Picks is all about variety and excitement. Whether you're a fan of basketball, hockey, or even League of Legends, Prize Picks has you covered. You can mix and match your picks across sports, choosing stars like LeBron, Caitlin Clark, Connor McDavid, and Jude Bellingham, all in one entry. It's the ultimate fantasy sports playground. Shaw and I grew up playing baseball, so we love to mix a little variety in with our picks from America's pastime. And for those of you who love a quick win, Prize Picks is the way to go. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Plus, with quick withdrawals and an enormous selection of players and stat types, it's no wonder Prize Picks is the go-to app for fantasy sports. So what are you waiting for? Download the Prize Picks app today and use promo code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's right, Prize Picks will match your deposit and give you more to play with. Remember, with Prize Picks, it's as simple as picking more or picking less. So let's get those entries in and watch the winnings roll. It's that easy. Don't forget to use the promo code CLNS to get your deposit match. And stay tuned for more basketball insights right here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Let's play and win together with Prize Picks. More Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw. Don't go away. We're back. Callie, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. I covered the Autopsy Report. Next to put on a slab. Young team, but man, did they have a hell of a season, and they pushed the Cleveland Cavaliers to a Game 7 in their first round playoff. Orlando Magic, Shaw, I got to tell you, a while back, we had our man Stephen Cameron on, and, he talked about how giddy he was about this team. He loved the fact that this team plays, top NBA defense, right? Top league defense. And listen, they pushed the Cleveland Cavaliers to 7 games, and the Cleveland Cavaliers, for the most part, they have some dynamic, players or possible playmakers here, with Darius Garland, with Spider Mitchell, Evan Mobley when he decides to show up from time to time and stuff. And they really force the Cleveland Cavaliers. Even in Game 7, where literally the Cavs were down double digits, they basically, forced the Cavs to lean on the shoulders of, Spider Mitchell to come out there and help them get this W. And I think that if you are the Orlando Magic, to have defense that carries with you, even in a hostile environment on the road where you almost have, victory within your grasp, I think it's impressive. And I think that you have a lot to ride, going into the offseason, you have a lot to ride on that's positive for a team this young. The upside is wonderful if you're an Orlando Magic fan.
Yeah, Jalen Suggs, I'm going to start there. Obviously, Banchero is the lowest hanging fruit and the brightest star, I think, of the bunch. But I think what Suggs has been able to do to kind of come into his own this year, especially on the defensive end, just transforms what they do and can captain that defense. Second rated going into the playoffs, going into this iteration in their first year. But their offense has a lot to be desired. But Suggs was immense. And, was one of those guys at the point of attack, can play multiple guys, guards and some wings as well too, and is a little bit of an irritant. Then you take, Franz Wagner into the situation, and he became a little timid throughout the course of the year, not really being able to have confidence in his jump shot. He really struggled in that game 7 against the Cleveland Cavaliers, just getting into the teeth of the defense and not being able to finish, 4 and 5 footers, and a couple of layups here and there. But ultimately, that's kind of like nitpicking at this roster. They have a bright future, as you alluded to. Banchero seems to be a guy who's going to continue to take steps, all-stars, getting into all NBA conversations, I think, at least at some point. But what can Jamal Mosley do to fill the rest of the roster and get some scoring, some shooting around these guys? And can it come naturally with Banchero and Wagner? Maybe. But I think they need some elite level shooting, on the wings. And I know what they like, what Wendell Carter's been able to give them even at that 5 position, but they just need to figure out ways to make things easier for those 2 main guys, especially if Suggs is going to stay on the floor and he himself is trying to continue to find his shot too. But I love this Orlando Magic team. They are one of the better stories out there in the playoffs. And, it's unfortunate to see them go here in 7 games, but this was a great, huge learning experience for them in their first playoff run as a team together.
Yeah, absolutely. So the few games that I had an opportunity to see the Orlando Magic play, there was something.
You didn't catch them on NBA TV because it's the NBA TV series.
Yeah, just that's what it should have been called. It should have been Orlando Magic TV rather than NBA TV. But one of the things that I had noticed, and I thought that this was pretty prevalent even in this series against the Cavs, is for Banchero. He didn't help himself because, a lot of what he was doing was basically, straight up face up against his defenders. Right. It was interesting to me because it never felt like there was ever a desire, and it's probably because they just don't have the personnel to do it, where if your big is camping out like right around maybe, like where Jokic would camp around. Right. And to be able to at least get the entry pass there and then get guys cutting to the basket, moving, side to side. I didn't see a lot of that. I saw a lot of guys kind of spacing out, camping out, Jalen Suggs, flanking out, baseline 3 because, and clearly you can see that that's where he was going to go. He's going to take the 3. Very seldomly does he, enter, into the lion's den, so to speak. And I felt like, until they learn how to do that, to your point, this is going to be the struggle with the Orlando Magic. They need somebody who's going to help move the offense further down the paint, sink in the defense to allow better looks for their guys to shoot the 3. Whether they shoot it at a high clip or make it at a high clip, I'm just saying that the better percentages. But I found that their offense is very, very stagnant if the ball is sitting in Banchero's hands and if it's sitting in Wagner's hands. And it's typically them starting from the top of the key, heading straight down to head with a full of steam and, pray for whatever comes of it. And, that's the maturation process of great players. They don't have to have like crazy jump shots, but I think ball movement helps mitigate that. And I didn't see enough of it when it came to the Orlando Magic. And I think that was prevalent throughout the course of the regular season. And I hope it is something that Jamal Mosley figures out a way to implement in order for them to get easier, better, more effective looks at the basket.
And I agree to some degree. Like, I think the aspect of trying to be more imaginative offensively is not necessarily a misnomer, but it's an easy way to say like Orlando needs to do more. But I think some of their guys can be better, but they need the talent, offensive talent, to have that level of creativity. It's, you can see the Cavs are like, listen, we will play your drives and we will send help, because that's where we know where you want to get to, and we'll live with you shooting the three if we all absolutely have to, And then going into the playoffs, the Cavs were 30th in 3-point attempts, 29th in makes, and 24th in an overall percentage, like bottom third, or if not next to last, and all of those things. Like, that's a tough place to be. And so defenses are not going to honor you. And then they're going to say, all right, well, come into the paint if you dare, and we'll just kind of stack things up. So Mosley needs the personnel in addition to the schemes that allow to unlock, Banchero and Franz better than we saw this season offensively. Like, they were a bottom third offense, although they were top two defense. And that has to come more into at least into the 15-14 range for them to take that next level of success.
Do you think that in order to get that's going to be by way of what they do via the draft, or do you think that's by way of free agency? Like, what do you think about a DeMar DeRozan with the Orlando Magic?
I mean, he doesn't help their 3-point shooting. He doesn't help their spacing because he's another mid-range guy. So, I mean, but if it's, the question there now just become, do you feel like they need a veteran guy, a productive veteran guy that they can stick into the lineup? And I think they were trying to do that on the cheap, if you will. And excuse me, because I actually like Joe Ingles a lot, but I think there's like, all right, Joe Ingles.
I love I love Joe Ingles. You remember I used to try to make him the sixth man of the year how many times?
Yeah, no, I remember for sure. But I mean, again, it's not apples to apples, but I think it's like, hey, that's the veteran guy who they wanted, who could maybe provide a little bit of production. He didn't provide quite the production that they were hoping for, had some injuries, et cetera, et cetera. So can they supercharge that with a DeMar DeRozan? They're also linked to potentially Paul George. They sniffed around the Klay Thompson situation if he were to leave Golden State. So I think there's a couple of options for them. Speaking of options, they have a lot of team options going into next year that you're not quite sure what they'll do, with Ingles being one of them.
All right.
So to me, they have the opportunity. They also don't. Isaacs doesn't have a guaranteed deal. So if they felt like, listen, at $17 million, you're not doing enough, but he did come around for them, especially defensively. They're tall across the board. And so now they have to figure out how they want to get better. They're going to have to sacrifice some of that defense. And I think guys like Isaac, and Ingles will probably come at the expense of that. Cole Anthony, they re-signed a couple of years ago, obviously not tall, but he gives them some offensive firepower coming off the bench. But is it enough for what they ultimately need long-term?
Yeah. So you bring up some really good points about, the length of this team. Yes, their length, is formidable, across the board, like amongst probably tops in the NBA. But I just think that fundamentally, I think this team defensively, I think they're going to be okay. And I'm not saying that, Jonathan Isaac is, someone that you should just toss away, his game's trash or whatever. But what I'm saying is that I think you can afford to lose a guy like Jonathan Isaac. You can bring somebody in, as long as your core guys, the Wagner brothers, Banchero, Jalen Suggs, you know what I'm saying? Like, these guys are pretty much your defensive stalwarts. They essentially lead the charge. Okay. So the other ancillary pieces around, I think it depends on what you're asking them to come in to do. I don't think it'll totally take away from how great they are as a team defensively. Now, for example, like Jonathan Isaac, if your intent is that you want someone to shoot the 3-ball better, okay, no problem. I got that. But I am just more of the mindset that to the idea of showing versatility to what you can offensively do, Shaw, like having someone that knows what to do in the painted area when a team isn't giving you the 3. Or if a team is giving you the 3, what you can do with guys who know what to do, extensive baseline out to the 3 area to even get a better look, to get the ball to your best shooters. You get what I'm saying? Sometimes it's not even so much the fact that the guy has to be there to shoot the ball as much as it is to give the perception that he's capable of shooting the ball. But all of that comes into what you were talking about before. What kind of player personnel are you giving Jamal Mosley to allow for that creativity to flourish. And that to me is what I'm going to be most curious of, because again, you could stick with what you currently have if these guys just come into the offseason and improve a little bit of what they couldn't give you in this playoff series, and towards the and during certain parts of the regular season when the Magic struggled. But I would like to probably see some additional pieces being added, because I think this team is good enough already as is. And rather than putting more of the burden, you want there to be that natural growth process for Banchero and Wagner and for Suggs, rather than rushing them into this idea that they've got to be so much better that they cut off their, themselves from that elevated success. Like, you see the incremental success in Jamal Murray. You see the incremental success in Anthony Edwards. These guys, they were taking those steps while they were getting, mollywopped in their playoff runs. Now you're seeing the greatness come through at the best points in time. And I just don't want it to be marginalized because you're bum rushing them to do more of what they naturally haven't had a chance to do yet.
There's two guys, one name bigger than the other, but Gary Harris was a starter for them, and Markelle Fultz. Those guys also don't have contracts, not even options. They don't have contracts. So I think in your pursuit, while Harris provides some level of defense for you, at one point was trending as a guy who people were excited about, could maybe be a 3D guy. I don't know that that's still the case. Again, good basketball player, rotation guy, but I don't know if he's a starter, for a playoff basketball team of the caliber that Magic ultimately want to be. And the same with Fultz. Is he giving you enough coming off the bench, especially if you have, Cole Anthony? And it's tough. Like, those are two tough decisions. And I think if they can get reasonable deals, then those guys can come back and still be a part of the rotation. But I'm not sure at what level of contribution Mosley and company will feel comfortable with them, going into next year, having to rely on them for a large portion of that, especially given the offensive needs that we're saying that they clearly need. Even if Banchero, even if Suggs, even if Wagner take leaps, there's still gaps that need to be filled, and you need to be able to, pick up things. If somebody does turn an ankle and is out for a 2 or 3 week stretch, you can't be falling back into, the recesses of the Eastern Conference. But again, all things considered, Orlando's had a really good season. Mosley finished second in Coach of the Year. I believe in what he's doing. They just need to put some accelerant on this here thing now. And it comes really, truly at the offensive side of the basketball.
Agreed. All right. Before we eulogize the Magic, I just wanted to get, what were your thoughts of Wendell Carter Jr.? It's interesting, how his NBA career has kind of veneered, and this could actually be a good destination for him. He certainly proved to be very valuable. It looks like Mosley relied on him heavily. And in many respects, especially in that game 7, when Wagner disappeared, his shot blocking, his ability to score points and things of that nature, really, really, really helped the Magic. Do you think that this could be a good destination? Like, if you are the Orlando Magic, you make sure that you lock him in as part of that foundation that you're building around with Banchero and the rest of those guys.
Well, 2 years left on the deal, so they're not rushing to anything right now. I think, especially at the number that it's at, 10, 11 million, that's a great space for him. He's 24, 25 years old, right? So still has room to grow, but it has evolved, I think, from what people thought he would be in terms of being able to shoot the three and being a spacer at the 5.
Maybe not look to try to extend so that you could probably, you know what I'm saying?
I don't think you need to rush into anything now. I mean, he's owed 2 years left, so you see where things are at. How does the roster fit around him going into next year? And then next summer is probably when you're trying to figure out, what are we doing here truly long term. Okay. But I like his growth. I think he obviously didn't get a great shot, or maybe didn't present his best self in Chicago. But I think his time in Orlando has been good, although checkered, if you will, with some injuries. So he only played 55 games this year. And as long as he can stay healthy, they have a solid rotation guy, and he can be a starting center, or he can be a guy that comes off the bench, I think, depending on matchups. But especially if he can continue to be a spacer, that allows, Banchero and Wagner opportunities to get into the lane like the way they love to do right now.
How confident are you about the combination of Wagner and Banchero? Do you think that they are future 1-2 combination that, can, if at the very least, this is, this is the minimum floor that they're able to get into the playoffs with the combination of them and Suggs? Or do you probably see yourself saying, maybe I see it with Suggs and with Banchero, but like if the Magic get to a point where they're probably getting knocked out of the first round, or maybe they wind up being play-in worthy rather than, being playoff, like top 4 team playoff, combatants, then do you think, all right, of a position that I want to upgrade or elevate, we could probably make Wagner expendable?
Yeah. Still too early. I think right now how they're tracking is if they're both going to operate primarily in the mid range, that's going to be problematic. Or if they always need to get downhill. Banchero is clearly more of an alpha and is willing to shoot the 3 ball faster and easier with more regularity than Wagner is. But all those things can change. And, so I wouldn't give up on guys who are 21, 22 years old yet at all. I think you have to live. I'm not even saying that you're saying that, but in terms of like, can they complement each other? Orlando definitely needs a couple more seasons, at least 2 more seasons, to probably come to that determination. All right, is this sustainable or not long term? But they both are kind of doing some similar things right now, and they're still young enough where they can grow to complement each other even better moving forward.
I would love to see Wagner, really, like in this offseason, really elevate his passing game. I think that he can be, an underrated passer. And I think if that part of his game comes out come next season, again, I think it will help flourish and open up some possibilities for how Mosley wants this team to operate offensively, the looks that they want to get Suggs and Banchero and Carter and everyone else. But somebody's got to, like I said, somebody's got to be there and want to be there and want to, be the outlet guy and set things up. And I think that'll free things up for Wagner and any big or front court based player with the way that the Magic play. So it'll be interesting to see. I hope that that's what does happen, because I do love watching Wagner play, and I would like to see that combination that the Magic have, flourish and get better, especially this upcoming season. But kudos to them, man. Hell of a season, hell of a run. They were 1 game away from finding themselves playing in the semis, and that's nothing to sniff at, because listen, the Magic have been in purgatory for how long now? So
yeah, this is a great step. And to your point, to close out on Franz, opportunity here, presuming he's still going to play in the Olympics, for his country. Great things can happen there in terms of like building his skill and his confidence going into next year. Obviously, he needs to get rest and stay healthy as well too, but I think he can kind of hone some of those skills that you're talking about by playing in the Olympics, and play maybe a little bit different role, more of an alpha on that team, and seeing how, hey, I know I can better pick my spots, and utilizing this skill set that hopefully he can develop over the course of the summer.
All right, man. This has been good stuff. Again, shout outs to the Magic. Great season. And, to the LA Clippers, I hope you work everything out. I hope that everything works out in a way that the Clippers, again, maintains success, maintains relevancy, and doesn't revert back to, being, the class clown, so to speak, of the NBA, or being ostracized, as the little brother, to the Los Angeles Lakers again. We want to see the Clippers successful, but I think a lot of it comes down to them departing from, the shenanigans that often at times it's either through management or through the players themselves that make the situation much more worse than it needs to be.
Yeah, very well said. I hope the Clippers, as you alluded to, can stay on course. But if the winds of change come sweeping, through the Inglewood area, I believe that's where their new arena is going to be. We'll see. But I wish Steve Ballmer and that group, all the success in the world, and we'll see where PG ultimately lands and where James Harden lands up as well too. But we'll end on a positive note. Again, kudos to that Orlando Magic team. Jamal Mosley, you are a real one. Love to get you on the show one time, my brother. And excited times, I think, for the rest of that young roster as well too. They acquitted themselves extremely well in the first round of the playoffs. Absolutely.
One last thing, Shaw, before we head out, and I know we didn't get a chance to do this, but we just want to make sure we give our flowers to Candace Parker. 16-year WNBA career. She called it quits. We're kind of like, right around on the precipice of the WNBA season starting up and stuff like that. I think it's been preseason started this weekend. I just wanted to make sure we give our flowers to her, man. It was, for when we had the opportunity to watch her play, I remember her coming up out of the University of Tennessee. She was, GOAT status supreme. She elevated the WNBA. She's elevated the WNBA's spotlight as far as color commentary goes. She's elevated the NBA spotlight in so many regards. We know that this is going to be her next career, but the career that she put together while being, one of the best to play the game of basketball is unheralded, unmatched. And I just want to make sure we send our flowers out to her.
Certified Hall of Famer. There's no doubt about it. So can't wait for that induction for her. And the support that she is sure to receive from the basketball community in those alike. And I just, if there's one sour grape to it, for me,
she gave Adidas a pulse.
no, but I'd say if there's one sour grapes for it for me is that the sport is at its highest height. It truly is growing, and it couldn't have gotten to this point without her. I just wish she could have been able to enjoy this limelight, in her playing career more in the way that the W is being highlighted now. And it's capturing the attention of fans of all ages, sexes, everything. Like, people are paying attention now. So it's unfortunate that she's stepping away here, but she did so much to get it to this point. And so again, I think it's apropos to give her, a fond farewell.
Well, I just hope that the WNBA continues to leverage the status that she brings to the table to help continue to open up more doors, because I don't think that, I would not be surprised, Shaw, if at some point that Candace Parker winds up being like part of an ownership group and owns a WNBA team.
Yeah, she can write her own ticket to do whatever she wants. Like, for really.
Yeah. And that's what I'm hoping for, is that, she's still continuing to your point, thrive in it. But, again, it would have been awesome if she was thriving in it while she was just dropping buckets, you know what I'm saying? And just relishing in the level of greatness that she was on the basketball. I'll tell you this much, though. I know a lot of teams are like, thank God CP ain't on that court any longer. You know what I'm saying? Like we had enough of her. You know what I'm saying? Whether she was Sparks, whether she was Sky, you know what I'm saying? So they're just like,
yes, indeed.
Yeah. Anyway, man, we appreciate everybody for hopping on board with us this week for the Baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you. We do. Catch up with you next time.